የኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብና መንግስት በሙሉ ድምፅ ሁል ጊዜ ቅድሚያ ለሰላም ይሰጣል። ሁል ጊዜ ለሰላምም ለጦርነትም የምንወስነው በብሔራዊ ጥቅማችን ጉዳይ የኢትዮጵያ አንድነት የኢትዮጵያ ጥቅም በሰላም መንገድ ማስጠበቅ ሲሳነን ሕይወት ዋጋ መስዋዕትነት እንከፍላለን። ከዛ በመለስ ተስፋ አለን ካሰብን ደግሞ ሁሌም ለሰላም በራችን ክፍት ነው። የሚካሄደው ከድርድር ውስጥም ትርፍ ካለ ለማግኘት ነው።
ተኩስ አቁሙም የተናጠል አድርገናል። የሚገባውን እርዳታ ካለ ክልክል እንዲገባ አድርገናል። መከላከያ ወደዛ እንዳይገባ አድርገናል። ሰላም ከመጣ በሚል ከገባንም ይህን ገደሉ ይህን እንደዚህ ያደረጉ ክስ ስለሚበዛ ከምንካሰስ በሚል ማለት አሁንም ሰላም እንፈልጋለን ብለናል። መፍትሄው ሰላም መሄድ ብቻ ነው የሚያዋጣው። ከዛ ውጭ ያለው ነገር ልንገዳደር እንችላለን፣ ግን ማሸነፍ የሚባል አባዳን የለም። ግን በሌላ በኩል ግድያ አያስፈልግም ይብቃን የሚል ሀሳብ ካልሆነ ጠቃሚ ነው ብዬ አላስብም። ስለዚህ መነጋገር ይችላል የሚል በዛው ላይ ሌላው ግን ተጠቃሚ ይሆናል ያሳስብ። እንግዲህ አሁን ታውቁት ትግራይ ላይ ችግር አለ። በሀገር ደረጃ ያለው እድገትና ለውጥ ትግራይ ውስጥ መኖር አለበት። ይህ እንዲሆን ሰላም ያስፈልጋል። ሰላም ማሸነፍ አለብን። ለሰላም ዋጋ መክፈል አለብን። ለሰላም አብዛኛውን እድል መስጠት ያስፈልጋል። ከአቅም በላይ ካልሆነ በስተቀር ወደ ችግር መግባት አያስፈልግም። የኢትዮጵያ አንድነት ሉዓላዊነትና ጥቅሟ እስካልተነካ ድረስ ሰላም ማስቀደም ይገባል። የምናደርገው ብዙ ነው።
ለሰው ልጆች ፍቅር፣ ለሰው ልጆች ሰላም፣ ለሰው ልጆች ፍቅር፣ ለሰው ልጆች ሰላም፣ ለሰው ልጆች በዓለም ዙሪያ ሁሉ ሰላም ይሁን ምድሩ ሁሉ።
የትግራይ ህዝባችን በብዙ ችግር ውስጥ ያለው መፍትሄው ሰላም፣ መፍትሄው በንግግር ቁጭ ብሎ ጉዳይ ላይ ውጊያ ተሞከረ ከእንግዲህ በኋላ ወያኔ በፈለገው እርዳታ በፈለገው ኃይል ላይ ሳይሆን የሚረዳው ሰው ቢያሰልፍ ማሸነፍ አይችልም። ማሸነፍ ካልቻለ መዋጋት አያስፈልግም። መነጋገር ምክሬ ጦርነት ይቃል፣ በአንድነት ይቃል። ቁጭ ብለን ተነጋግረን በንግግር 3 ዓመት ከምንዋጋ 10 ዓመት ብንወያይ ይሻላል። ከምንገዳደል ሌላው ሳይቀር ከመሆን አርፈን ተቀምጠን ተነጋግረን በሰሰቶ መቀበል ማለት ችግሮቻችን መፍታት። ትግራይ በዛ ውስጥ ችግሯ ይፈታል። የማደግ ዕድል አላት። የማደግ ዕድል አላት። ያንን ማድረግ ይጠበቅብናል። ዋናው ወሳኝ ህዝብ እዛ ያለው ህዝብ ጥቅሙንም ያውቃል፣ ጉዳቱንም ያውቃል። ይሄን አስቦ ወደ መልካሙ ነገር ማስወሰድ አለብን።
Hello everyone, welcome to MD Media's weekly show, the H panel. Today we are back on the topic of Ethiopia. Talk of peace, talk peace, do war. This is the topic, and welcome again, gentlemen. It's great to have you back, Dr. Burbridge, Faisal Robla, and Skel Gapisa. I played a number of clips. That's since August 26, the state media, Ethiopian television, Ethiopian Broadcasting Services, uh, Broadcasting Corporation, it was releasing old and new speech by the Prime Minister on peace. And day before yesterday, it was the annual Peace Day of Ethiopia commemorated in Addis Ababa and other places. With that background and with the raging war in Tigray and elsewhere in Oromia, we chose the topic, Talk Peace, Do War. So we will come back to that topic shortly, but we will start as usual with what stood out for you guys, for the panelists. Let's start today with Duke. Duke, what was the highlight for you over the past 7 days?
Well, I think the highlight for me last week, or this week rather, was the release of the new UN OCHA report, and with that, the release of the food cluster update, the dashboard that shows where we are. And it was a little surprising and positive development to a degree here. When you see where we were last week is there on the left, where we had about half of the central region, half of the southeast, a little more than half of the southeast, half of the eastern region had food dispatched. Now, with the start of the conflict, restart of the conflict, and the confiscation of some of the fuel by TPLF authorities, I was wondering if the dispatch would continue this week, the week after the conflict started, and it appears that it has. You see on the right there, you see that most of the central area, except for a small portion, is filled in. The eastern area, the southeast area. Of course, the districts that are under occupation or being contested actively, they're not able to get any food out there. But they're able to get food into a lot of places, and that's good. I would take Western Tigray with a grain of salt, because that's just based on what the Ethiopian government says is going out there, and God knows what's actually happening. The problem that I see, though, is that without more fuel and more food, this progress will stop quite suddenly once they run out. And I think that there's a clock ticking on everybody to get things, something set up to where there is a restoration of humanitarian access, because war cannot be a reason why humanitarian access is not granted. With my camera in the region right now, he should be negotiating to get that restored. That would be consistent with the Senate resolution that passed recently about weaponized starvation. He should get assurances, like he did last visit. He should get assurances for the safety of the convoys and the aid workers, and he should make that public. And if that's broken, it should be broken publicly, so that everybody understands what's happening right now. But so that was my big takeaway is that update coming out after a month of having no updates, and seeing that things are a little bit back on the ball.
Great, thank you, Duke. Faisal, highlights?
Yes, I think what stood out for me was the sort of anarchy that exists within the Ethiopian government vis-a-vis Somalia, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, and others. As we recall, there was a memo. Well, it was not only a memo, it was a news release through the Ethiopian national TV, both the English program as well as other medium throughout the country, including the Somali regional TV, that said that the new Somali president, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, and his government were working with Al-Shabaab, and they were working with, Shane and all this, and they are almost there to sabotage and invade and create havoc on Ethiopia. Then, and that news was all over including a website that belongs to the Federal Defense Ministry of the Ethiopian government, as well as, all its media. Then there was a subsequent one also that came to surface, which this time also blamed the Ogaden National Liberation Front as working with Al-Shabaab. Basically, they said the Ogaden National Liberation Front is a terrorist group that's working with Al-Shabaab, and they are trying to also work with TPLF. They accused both the Somali government as well as the Ogaden National Liberation Front to be in cahoots in this war with TPLF. Now, that was really a surprise to both ONLF and the Somali national government. And basically, they could not really put their hand where this was coming from, because the last thing that Somalia knew about Ethiopia was when Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, the new president, wanted to visit Addis Ababa via Djibouti. It was the Ethiopian government that told him that they were not ready. So that meeting was suspended. There were rumors and issues that came from the Ethiopian side as to why Abiy was mad. Very juvenile madness, such as he didn't get what he wanted in terms of the narcotic trade, because he wanted Somalia to not deal with Kenya. And the new government said they will deal with anybody like a free market. That's the only thing that they at the time said was an obstacle to the meeting of the two leaders. But this thing took everybody by surprise. Now, after 2 days of that, the Ethiopian government scrambled for a cover, and basically they retracted what they said, and the foreign ministry issued another news release saying, disassociating itself from that kind of position. And I was informed that they are also probably would be doing the same thing towards the ONLF. Now, a lot of people ask the question as to why. In 2 days' time, Ethiopia is known to have really a very solid, in the past, very solid foreign affairs, particularly vis-a-vis Somalia, because that's a potential conflict area. And basically what we are understanding from at this point in time is that there's a deep state in the Prime Minister's office that really caters even not to what the Prime Minister wants. Even if you agree with the Prime Minister, that deep state group is not really, conferring and, providing the Prime Minister what he wants. These are people who, quote unquote, from the Oromo side and from the PP Oromo side, believe that the Prime Minister is sabotaged because he didn't know and nobody knew. And this action was reversed after 6 ministers were called to discuss and look at the issue, and none of them knew anything about this. Now they want to blame this on small, low-level bureaucrats. That's fine, but this was a big, huge issue, and the only explanation at this point in time we have is that there is an underhand, buried in the Prime Minister's office. As to the ONLF, which still holds the peace agreement that is signed with the federal government of Ethiopia since 2018, nobody knows. Now, there's one theory, and I haven't yet gotten to the bottom of that theory, but there is some sort of sabotage also going on that does not want Ethiopia and the new Somali government to work with, and that sabotage group is located in Jigjiga, in the government of Jigjiga. And that those facts and figures are about to come as to how that is structured, but that's also another theory as to who is really muddying the water. And I think that's stood up for me.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Pascal?
Of course, what should stand out for everyone should be nothing but the raging war in northern Ethiopia, the war that we talked about last week. But even within the context of this raging war, a couple of things really astonished me a great deal this week. One is Eritrea's behavior. Recall that according to the Ethiopian government, Eritrea intervened in the Tigray war last year because allegedly TPLF fired missiles that hit targets in Asmara. So the idea at that time was that Eritrea was involved in the war, invoking its right of self-defense. Well, the problem with that reasoning at the time was that Eritrean forces entered Ethiopia almost 10 days prior to the firing of the missiles. Now, I don't know what reason that Isaias would invoke this time to intervene in the war in Tigray within Ethiopian territory. If Isaias Afwerki has any legitimate reason or any legitimate fear that he might be attacked, then he must invoke that right of self-defense excuse to help his comrade in crime, Abiy Ahmed. He should once again send troops into Tigray if that is what the reason for involvement would be, to try and his fate again. I am astonished by his timidity, his opportunism, and his lack of courage and confidence to confront the TDF, who just last week reminded him of his ignominious defeat last year within Tigray in the mountains of Temben, where after witnessing the loss of the Ethiopian Defense Forces around Adet in central Tigray, he went home with his tail between his legs. This time around, he wouldn't fight like a brave soldier if he was indeed threatened. He's not fighting for a cause. Instead, he has chosen to rain artillery shells on civilian targets around Adigrat, killing children, 5 of them, and wounding 14 women and senior citizens who cannot run away from his lobbing artillery shells on civilian targets. Again, he's also massing troops around Rama and Zalambasa. Now, what concerns me is not his timidity and his timorousness, his diffidence. I am ashamed of the international community, which is equally timid and diffident. The United Nations Security Council cannot gather to condemn Eritrea, but they are scrambling to gather to condemn Sudan for allegedly helping TPLF. I think this kind of behavior on the part of the international community reminds me of Munich in 1939, that the international community hasn't learned from last year, hasn't learned from history. In fact, as a matter of fact, what I saw of the international community representation in Addis Ababa is equally astonishing for me when the Ethiopian government allegedly, and I think because the international community representatives in the capital did not protest, that he made protection of the premises of embassies and missions in Addis Ababa based on them providing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs prior reports about activities on their own premises in Addis Ababa. I thought when I read that letter, I thought that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent that letter to Ethiopian missions abroad. I could not even believe it. Even as the Ethiopian government shows that kind of incompetence and lack of knowledge about rudimentary diplomatic decorum, they're not saying anything. They're not really defending their right to protect their own sovereign territory and tell the Ethiopian government that it has the protection of these premises and embassy personnel is not dependent on them cooperating with the edict of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is a concern. For me, this is a concern when the diplomatic community, the international community, does not stand on principles at all. Even the basics of diplomacy and international relations. If they cannot defend those fundamental principles, it is very difficult to expect them to defend bigger principles like the right to protect civilians. This, in the context of the raging war, was really astonishing to me, that the behavior of the Ethiopian government and the Eritrean government and the silence of the international community.
Great, thank you, Scale. We just learned that there is, I think it's this afternoon, the U.S. President Biden wrote a letter to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And last year, I think it's a year ago, on September 17th, Executive Order 14046 was declared, and the President is either supposed to let the Federal Register and as well as the House of Representatives on the extension or the end of that declaration. So a national emergency was declared through that executive order, and this short letter from President Biden is saying that prevailing conditions in Ethiopia, that is involving ethnic-based violence, rape, and other forms of gender-based violence, obstruction of humanitarian operations, all that is still going on, and he is asking that the national emergency declared in that order should be continued starting September 17th. That would be next week. That is a recent development. And let's go back to the topic. The topic today is talk of peace, but doing war. And this is a topic of interest, given we learned as well representatives from Tigray and the federal government are in Djibouti as we speak. We heard Gideon Timotheos and Redwan Hussein are in Djibouti representing Abiy. So what do we make of this parallel, double-tongued approach in terms of war and peace? And even we learned, as reported by the Standard, 2 days before the National Peace Day was celebrated in Addis, 35 local civil society organizations were prohibited from holding a call for peace press conference in the capital. Faisal, you want to take that on?
Yeah, I think this is a multidimensional issue. On the one hand, the purported potential, they haven't met yet, potential meeting between the two sides is probably the third round. Some of them we don't know, but at least we know 2 or 3 times that they met with no conclusive results, particularly nothing that really changed the equation. People are being killed, people are dying out of hunger. The siege is continuing, and a new war has started. So I don't want to be over optimistic to jump on. I really want to stay in the same corridor that I have been in for a long time, which is my pessimism toward this international order when it comes to conflict resolution. And today, I think my colleague also re-articulated that, how the international community is not as serious as the Tigray person dying or the Amara person, for that matter, being caught in between the two fire, or the Oromo. They're not really as serious as this people dying. So until I see some tangible thing, I'll just treat as for what it is, especially understanding and learning that people like Gideon and Radwan are part of the interlocutors for this negotiation. I mean, there are some of the spoilers, although they're working for the government. What I would expect from a meeting that those individuals are sitting, I want to remain pessimistic until I see something tangible on that. Having said that, I'm a believer, and I've articulated this quite many times. And Abiy said, actually, recently in this last time, I think the point, the goal of Prime Minister Abiy and his team is to bring TDF and Tigray into its knees. Period. He has not given us anything, whether it is at the international forum, at his speeches, at the way he's treating people who are who hail from the Tigray nation, anything that even comes close to a gesture toward this peace. So I don't know why people get excited about this. Abiy's policy is to, through hunger, through siege, through holding back services, to bring TDF and Tigray to its knee. And that is impossible. That is the madness of this. Whether you supported TDF, TPLF or not, this is an organization that was created in 1974. Abiy was trained by TPLF. He is a product of TPLF. I thought he would know more than anybody that it is impossible for him to wish that he can destroy TPLF at this juncture. Maybe through time, 20 years, 30 years, it can wither, so to speak. But I think for him engaging the war, a war that is the largest scale war as we speak today, with an estimated 500,000 casualty in the first and second phase. And the third phase we have to assess. For Abiy to say his goal is to either completely wipe out TPLF or kind of bring the entire Tigray region to its knee, tells me that's a childish game. So is Abiy and his team serious? No. Why? That's the question. I honestly believe that Abiy and company are pessimistic about the future. There's a very interesting article in the Current Affairs magazine written by a professor who hails from the same institute, Tufts School of Law, that is really looking at the world scale in terms of how international relation is approached and who wants what, who wants war, who doesn't want war, who basically the way you view the world gauges what you want out of this. I think there is a serious pessimism in Aret Kilo, pessimism about the future, pessimism about where Abiy sees himself in the next 10 years, pessimism about the people who surround him as to what would happen if change comes. And with that pessimism, not being comfortable in what the future holds for them, they haven't brought fruits to the table that are serious about peace. Until they really bring something that we can hang on to and see signs of peace, and they lead to a peaceful resolution, including and up to lifting right without any condition the siege, letting food aid and medicine unhindered go to Tigray, stopping harassment every time there is a conflict, harassing Tigranya speakers and collecting them and putting them in prisons, and all the other things that we know of. Until and unless Abiy puts that and codifies and says those will not happen, and this is how I'm gonna lift the siege and this date, that's how I'm gonna resume all the banking, all the services, then we can say peace is progressing. Up to this point, peace is being used as a whipping, instrument to just frustrate TDF and TPLF, to show the world that Abiy is speaking about peace, but as this topic says, but seriously conducting war, a war that he will never win, as he himself says. And I think it's just unfortunate that we have a leadership that doesn't feel comfortable in what the future holds for them. And if they do so, they will not conduct peace business in a serious manner.
Thank you, Faisal. I'll come to you, Doc. Before that, Iskel, last week you mentioned about how within the military, Abiy Ahmed, even bypassing the chief of staff, was breaking the chain of command, which is the very characteristic feature of militaries anywhere. We heard today that even further, he is dealing with a couple of people, Solomon Benti, I think he's a major general, and another one, Kafialo Amde. And UMD Media heard as well that he even went to the extent of confiscating their cell phones, the generals' cell phones because he's so unhappy with what happened in the southern front, including today we heard the Republican Guard division, even the commander Colonel is captured today. So what are we reading in terms of doing war and talking peace, even sending people to negotiate in Djibouti scale?
Let me say something about talking war and add to what talking peace and add to what Faisal said, and I'll talk about the doing the military side of it. This is not serious. The whole process is not serious, and here is why. This is about reaching an agreement for a cessation of hostilities. That's the purpose of the meeting. And the only people who can discuss, negotiate, and reach an agreement about cessation of hostilities must be military people. Because the idea of cessation of hostility is that the combatants, it simply means that combatants are willing to stop firing at each other and restrain anybody that might be tempted to break it. This can be done only by the military people who know the formations and the positioning and the orders that are in place, the orders that are given. Only military people or people who are familiar with the military lay of the land. The two people that are allegedly sent for negotiations, Gedeon Timotheus and the advisor to the minister Redwan Hussein. Yeah, I know Gedeon Timotheus when he was in the university. He is no politician. He's not even a legal someone who knows the bureaucracy. He is not, much less engage adversaries. He is not personally equipped to do that. He just doesn't have the experience, the know-how, the flow of intelligence, the military. He does not. Only if Abiy Ahmed was serious about this, he would have included Burhanu Bakkala, who is a member of the delegation that he had named, because he is in charge of intelligence. Last time, when an agreement was reached, and Abiy went ahead and unilaterally declared humanitarian truce, there was an agreement between the two parties. And who negotiated it? The Chief of Staff of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and the commander of the TDF. That's how you achieve cessation of hostilities. If you're doing it any other way, you're not serious. You're absolutely not serious. And nobody should take it seriously, because it's not. And I'm sure that the TDF side are not going to take it seriously, but they have to go and see it. But Abiy is not serious. The reason that he's not serious is, I think my friend Faisal was expecting Abiy Ahmed to be a reasonable guy, a rational person who could look at left and right, events and processes, and then arrive at a rational conclusion. He can't. We've talked about this so many times on this. He cannot. Number one, Abiy believes that he is the anointed one. I tell you, he believes this because he wants to believe it, that he is the anointed one who was sent, the Messiah that was sent by the divine to save Ethiopia. No one can defeat him. He believes this. Not TPLF, not TDF, not anybody, not even the United States could defeat Abiy, because he is sent by the divine to save Ethiopia, historic Ethiopia. That was mentioned in the Bible 300 times, that he has a messianic mission. He's on a messianic mission. So rational considerations that we are talking about, they don't have any impact on him. Number two, and I've said this, the war that is being fought in all over Ethiopia today, these are wars that Abiy is fighting in his own head. He fights this war in order because he feels that TPLF or TPLF operators are going to kill him. So he has to finish them off. This is the war in his head. It's simply being played out outside in the fields. He cannot help himself. Abiy has a problem about this, and I know this even when the TPLF was in power. Every night he was telling his friends that last night he was really scared and he was holding onto his gun, and that is how he slept the whole night because he thought some of TPLF operatives were going to kill him. This is before he was a prime minister. Now he has something to protect, the prime minister's office that he has acquired. This war is for him, it's in his head. That's what he's fighting. So he cannot be serious. Third, Abiy is not in control. Abiy is not in control of the war. This war is the war that is commandeered by Amhara elite on the one hand and by Isaias Afwerki from Asmara. This is not a war that Abiy himself controls. He cannot stop it if he cannot control it. And that would give me a segue about the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. I don't know about Kafialo Amde. He was the commander in Abyei. I don't know if he's back in Ethiopia.
He's back.
He's back in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
All right. I wouldn't say much about him, but the Solomon Benti guy, he was a colonel last year when the Tigray Defense Forces were in Afar. Abiy believes that it is Solomon Benti, who was the commander of the forces that were stationed in Afar, that saved Ethiopia and Abiy's power. That's what Abiy believes about Solomon. So he elevated him from a colonel, skipping over brigadier general, and made him a major general. He was made a major general just because Abiy believed that he stood in the way of the TPLF in the Afar desert, and because of that, he was promoted from colonel to major general. He was then sent to Ethiopia to Wallagga with the head of his division, and now he is back. So Abiy actually says it's not only about ordering, respecting the chain of command and ordering the operation guy. He goes to Bunty, Solomon Bunty, and tells him what to do because he now says that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces are nothing. The only person that he trusts and is capable of stopping the TPLF is Solomon Bunty. So he could order him from Arat Kilo, wherever he's war theater that he's in. So the thing that in Ethiopia is the political divisions within the Prosperity Party have now also divided the military. The Amhara followers of the Amhara section of the Prosperity Party had organized the Agaw and Amhara speaking generals and colonels within the military. Now that the Oromo and others have known that this has happened within the military, they are also organizing themselves. That is the political fragmentation within the body politic is now within the military. That's the state of affairs about the Ethiopian military today.
Thank you. Kapelo Amde, he finished his term and left for Nigerian general, I guess, in end of February this year. Look, one thing that played out this week as well is the letter from the president of Tigray to the UN and to the General Secretary, but also to the current president of the Security Council. And in that letter, among other things, there is a mention of lasting peace. That's relevant, I guess, for our topic. So the Tigray government, through its president, outlined a number of points, what they call elements for cessation of hostilities and for peace. And on the other hand, like Scale mentioned, maybe days before that, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia sent out a letter to the embassy's diplomatic missions in Addis. And according to Rene Lefort, I guess he said he never even read these kind of, I think, directives to embassies, even in Eritrea and North Korea. So again, talking about the topic, talk peace and do war. What do you take on that?
Yeah, the letter that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs released about the embassies is something that I've never heard of before. The idea that they should check in with the government if they're going to have any meetings, or if they're going to convene anybody. That's what they do at embassies. They do this every day, every other day. It's just unbelievable. I wonder what prompted that, or what they're going to say prompted that, because it is an extraordinary move. The letter that was written by the TPLF to, I believe it was to the UN, or to the Secretary General, about the prospects for peace. What is outlined in the letter is a conventional good practices peace process. I mean, this is what they're trying to do now. What the U.S., what Mike Hammer and the special envoys before him, they were trying to put forth a plan that didn't really have a good chance of succeeding. When you have somebody that the TPLF has already rejected as the lead of the process, and you bend everything towards the side of the Ethiopian government, they make concessions that TPLF is not going to honor. If it doesn't matter if the special envoy, or if the Bureau of African Affairs at Department of State says that it's okay to hold the basic services and the food and fuel until negotiations progress. For them to say that is one thing. However, to get the TPLF, it's a poison pill, because the TPLF is certainly not going to agree to that. And if you know that the one side is not going to agree to that, then you might as well have that fight, have that argument with your counterparts in the Ethiopian government, rather than put something together that contains all of these deal breakers and then try to take that down to Tigray and tell them that this is how it's going to be. It's a more rational concept, what was laid out by the TPLF, to have mediators there, to have some accountability, to have to have the restoration of services, unfettered aid access, and the restoration of the pre-war borders, which could be an issue. But it's something that it's remarkable to me, as somebody who has experience in peace building, that this is probably a non-starter. The idea that accountability is going to be introduced into this at some point, I'm sure that people started shaking their heads no as soon as they read that part, because this is a strange time to introduce it. They're gonna think. I mean, they have built a process on no accountability, and to the point that was made earlier, the international community, and when I say international community, I'm talking about the U.S. specifically here, needs to be on the side of human rights, the civilians, humanitarian access. These are things that an outside agent can do. These are things that, even if you're not in the conflict, you can still look and say, civilians should not be targeted. There shouldn't be, aerial bombardments of schools in the capital. And if you abandon those principles, if you say that, all right, well, we're going to have a siege and we're just going to pretend that it's not going on, or we're not going to address the human rights violations, or we're going to sweep the genocide under the rug. If you do all of those things, you're no longer an honest broker. Then when it comes to having mediations, having actual negotiations, then in Tigray, they know that you're not going to be able to hold Abiy accountable for anything. They've proven, the international community has proven, that we will accept whatever Abiy decides to do, and we'll make excuses for him, and we'll spin things for him, but we won't hold him accountable. And so then who's going to guarantee any promises? He made a promise last time they were talking, reportedly that they were going to open up aid access. That didn't get opened, and now we're at war again. So they destroy their own credibility by abandoning these basic principles that they are supposed to be upholding. And I think that's where we get into a lot of problems. I think at that point, it becomes just like he was saying, a waste of time. I mean, it's a frustrating process right now.
Yeah, in that letter, to your point, the president cited his previous letter from, I think, August 23rd, where they reportedly said previous peace processes or efforts were set up to fail. So he's making a plea on appeal for making this time, something that would work, that would make peace lasting effort. And there is an expectation, if it's not pushed, because still Mike Hammer is in Addis, he might not come back over the weekend, I guess. If the UN Security Council might be meeting on Ethiopia on Monday. And with that, Faisal, how do you see what's happening on the front from the Adigrat shelling, where children were killed, and there are a number of fronts going on: Western Tigray, Humera, the Wolkite area, Dedebit. We heard about the breaking of the bridge on Tekazes. This is the second bridge, I guess, out of the four that's broken by Ethiopian forces. And we still know that the Kobo front is going on, the Sokota. There are multiple fronts, the president also mentioned in his letter. With that in mind, and Ola is also making advances. We heard some border districts falling under OLA as well. How do you see, given the new year coming as well? There were some people actually, maybe before the new year, Abiy might say something about peace and unilateral declaration of all that and so on. So, Faisal, how do you play out? Do you see this play out in the coming days?
Yeah, I think a week ago, some insider in Abiy's camp told me that the Tigray was attacked on 15 points, 15 spots. And when I counted yesterday, some of the red spots on the map that several media is giving, they're about 14, 15. So this was, a plan that Arat Kilo had this time to be, do or die. Also, there's a talk within Abiy circle that I think probably there has to be some sort of breaking down TDF, TPLF this time, and then probably start talks and negotiation, what have you. I think that they have encountered a very unexpected challenge, including Eritrean troops being stopped. And today, before I joined you guys, I was watching some clips where an Eritrean commander is captured and he's being interviewed. Never happened, and that goes to scale earlier as to what Eritrea this time would say. A commander of high ranking is in the hands of TDF with a lot of Eritrean soldiers. Some people also reporting that some of the hospitals, local hospitals in Asmara, are really tangibly felt in terms of the wounded. So this time, I think my opinion is that, number one, I don't know how much, but I think most of the people who are observing this war, including OLA, TDF, and other groups, came to the reality that America is not what it was in the 1970s and 1980s. This is a soft, weakened America in terms of foreign policy. Academia literature is replete with a lot of Americans really seriously looking at how America descended, even lost its soft power, let alone its military power and its influence with the rise of China, Russia being belligerent, America's behavior being too much reluctant. That really makes America, as Duke really put it aptly, America's ability for mediation really weakness that. There's another thing also that the No More movement, who are funded, by the way, from Addis Ababa, and I will say, yeah, here is the commander being captured. There's another also big punch coming from Abiy's group through the No More movement that is accusing America of anti-Africanist and anti-racist. And that reminds me of Shelby Steele, a neocon African-American who wrote a very tiny book, but very persuasive, where he said, if you really want to disarm a white liberal, just call him, you are a racist and you are black. They will drop everything and they will say, what do you want? That's what, and basically what the No More movement is doing, knowingly accusing America, the only power that's pumping money and everything, and to Abiy's team, accuse them of racism and anti-Africa. That's also immobilizing America's ability to really become an honest broker, and literally made America a not so much useful intermediary. We can see how many times the envoy has been changed. We are running the third with no tangible result at this point in time. And that is a symptomatic of America's inability to do anything here. I think there's a challenge both for Abiy and for TDF. I think for Abiy, unless something happens that we have not seen so far, I think he has adapted the syndrome of a pessimist of the future. He doesn't see glowing stars in the future. He has alienated Oromo. He has alienated Tigray. There is no formula to do, if you will, a very genuine reconciliation. What does he has to offer? Despite the rhetoric and slogans, what is there that Abiy, as the leader of the country, can offer to the Tigrays to heal the wound? I don't know. If anybody, except, TPLF is oppressing, Tigrays, all those gimmick, propagandistic thing. What is there that Abiy, as a big man, as a big leader, if there is such a thing, has to offer to the Tigray people to heal the wounds? Very deep scar wounds. That's number one. I think with the TDF, TPLF, this time they cannot retract, because the Tigray people are getting also tired of going to war, starving, not getting access to medicine, supporting TDF. This time it has to do or die, in which case they may capture Western Tigray and Humara. They may also stay parts of Amara region as a negotiating and not probably advance, but stay there. And in the meantime, work across the board with other groups such as Ola and other groups, the Command and what have you. I think, in my opinion, the two sides cannot resolve their issue. I think we need peace to bring this war into an end so people can plow their land. But I don't think the bloodshed that has been carried out on both sides is not something we can ignore. We need, as Duke said, a very honest, trusted, strong, with incentives, carrots, who comes to the table, who will bring a lot of toolbox to the table as part of its responsibility. The conditions are one thing, but the responsibility of the interlocutor should be one. If anybody breaks, we will protect the civilians, whether they're in Tigray or in the Amara region. We will create safe airspace so that people don't. A very structured elements of peace that also protected the people who are being the subject of this war. Unless America, the US, comes with that, I think everything is futile. I just want one last caveat. I don't think we would have been discussing this kind of discussion had the people that we see on this picture were Europeans. I think there is the race issue. Cornel West talks and says race matters. in all political engagement, race matters on both sides. If this were a European country, as we talked quite a lot, there would have been a higher involvement with the US. And I think the the US government has been a bit sluggish in handling and putting its heavyweight on this. At the end, if this time it doesn't do something serious, it may as well lose both sides. It's already lost Tigray and the people's heart. It may also lose the Aret Kilo, and while it has that, name and some sort of prestige on both sides, it has to use this time around its ability to bring something that's meaningful.
Thank you, Faisal. It's exactly 2 years ago today, Tigray had election, and the time, the months before the election, and after that is what transpired, or what ended up to be the November 4, 2020 war. Still, how do you see, again, we always say that it's very hard to predict, things change every day. We might hear something over the next 24 hours, but still your insight is important in terms of what you read and what could transpire in the coming days and weeks. You are muted, I guess.
I guess if I go back to what I was saying about the man in Arat Kilo, who basically today is the warlord of Arat Kilo, basically, it's very difficult to say how things are going to unfold. But based on what we know, what you showed in Addis Standard about the civil society organizations asking for war, and listen to the public discourses in Ethiopia, at least one thing has dawned on the Prosperity Party leadership, if not Abiy. On the economic front, the Ethiopian economy had not recovered from the damages that were caused by last year's war. We know the consequences of that devastating war on the Ethiopian economy. You could see today, for Abiy and company to continue to prosecute this war, they have to pay for it. It's not free. Last year, he was able to sell the telecommunications for $800 and transfer the entire money to Turkey to buy drones. This year, what they have proposed to sell, it, the banks, all of a sudden, they're ready to sell banks and holdings and other financial institutions to outsiders. I'm not sure it's going to happen anytime soon. I don't know if there are any banks that are outside Ethiopia that are going to start engaging the Ethiopians at a time of war. But they have proposed that. They have proposed to sell the 8 sugar mills, sugar factories, to individuals. They have proposed, the Minister of Finance, Ahmed Shide, had said that if there are buyers, that the Ethiopian government is ready to sell the industrial parks. I know they are selling buildings these days. They're selling government-owned individual buildings to their political supporters, killing 2 birds with one stone. That is, get quick money from selling buildings in Addis Ababa and selling them to their supporters, their Oromo supporters. I don't think you can prosecute a war. You can pay for war by selling buildings. I don't know. I mean, it's like a weekend garage sale out here that Ethiopia is engaged in to fight a war. I don't think that's going to happen. Politically, the PP is not in a position to prosecute a war to a successful conclusion. It is fragmented. at all levels. I mentioned earlier the differences and the division between the Amhara side of the PP and the Oromo side of the PP. They are at each other's throats. We know this. And within the Oromo PP, there is the leadership is entirely from central Ethiopia, and there is the northern Shawans and the western Shawans that are fighting over war spoils and over um, uh, appointment to ministerial posts. They're fighting. They're fighting to dislodge each other. This is another layer. Within Amhara and Oromo within PP, and then within PP, Oromo PP, there is division. There is also division within the Amhara PP. Historically, Amhara, there had always been division between the deterritorialized Amhara. This is Sever Chernystov, the Russian scholar who coined this, that the deterritorialized Amhara. They're not necessarily Amhara, but they're elites in Addis Ababa who have only common economic interests. And the war in Tigray, in part, was their war. Western Tigray is their war. And there is the territorial Amhara in the region who are really carrying the brunt of the war itself. There is that division within there. With that kind of political cohesion or lack thereof, you cannot prosecute a war. It's not possible. The military, you know what happened last year to the Ethiopian military. We know what happened. This year, since they started the war, if all reports are true, they have lost 23 divisions in the southern front. If reports are true, they have lost about 17 or 18 divisions in the Debdebit area in the western front. They have also lost or severely damaged an entire command, the Eastern Command that came from the Eritrean types to Shararo. You're losing your military. No, in the military they don't want to fight. In fact, the former prisoners of war are organizing them to surrender. So Abiy might want to prosecute the war, but there are structural problems for them not to be able to prosecute this war to a successful conclusion. But there is a lot of sunk cost. They're not going to go back. So this war is going to grind on. The economic situation is going to deteriorate. The political finger pointing within the political parties is going to deteriorate again or get exacerbated. And the military is going to lose. And I say that the political division is now within the Ethiopian national military. So what I see really, not any time in the next day or so, is the eventual collapse of authority in Ethiopia.
Thank you. One thing that how the war is manifesting itself is in terms of POWs in masses. And this is the Chief Executive Director of IDER Comprehensive Specialized Hospital that is the largest in the region, serving as well Northern Amhara. So it's a regional referral hospital. The director, Dr. Kibrom Gabraselase, tweeted yesterday from Magala upon the request of the ISRC, the Red Cross, International Red Cross, we evaluated the wounded POWs. Most of them need some form of surgery. We need resources. It's our duty to treat them. So you can imagine how this would again be heavy on the very limited resources, medical supplies, even professionals, unpaid, unsalaried ones, because they haven't received their salary for maybe 2 years now. They don't have access to their bank services, and they are tweeting from Magala about POWs who are wounded from the Ethiopian Eritrean side. Actually, the one Faisal mentioned, that commander of the Eritrean army who was captured, he was wounded, and he was treated again to just feel well and give that interview. So, gentlemen, we'll go to the final thoughts. Duke, you can also reflect on how you see this unfolding, specifically your interest in terms of peace, in terms of the humanitarian aspect, You showed out when we start with how things were improving, but you left out with that question of how it might play out as well. Your take on that?
Yeah, when I look at how things could unfold, I think what Ethiopia has to be afraid of, what the regime has to be afraid of right now, is something like Yemen happening, where you can't send any more soldiers out because if you send the soldiers out, they may just surrender. They may just you might be sending just more weapons to the other side by sending out more soldiers. Um, and then you start to get a breakdown of authority when your allies see that you can't reinforce them with government troops. Then you see alliances break down. People realize that it's just them fighting the TDF rather than them with the government forces fighting the TDF, which is going to be a losing battle, I think, for anyone. So I think that there should be some concern there that if things start to break down, that's going to start happening pretty rapidly, and you'll see a situation where the state is just in complete disarray, and God only knows what happens at that point. What needs to happen right now for the international community, for the United States, is that they have to press on humanitarian access, respect for human rights. Whether this war goes for one more day or whether it goes for another year, there are certain, whether or not it stays confined to Tigray or whether or not, in Oromia and everywhere else in Ethiopia, there needs to be respect for international humanitarian law. That's what the U.S. needs to push on. You get that in place, and I think that takes a lot of the driver out of the conflict. And I think that you can see a path for peace through that. Trying to do peace first, then international humanitarian law. It hasn't worked so far. They've been at it for at least in earnest. They've been at it for a year. And it's just there's no positive outcome that can be expected from that right now. So I have no idea what the message that Mike Hammer's took to Ethiopia was, but it needs to change from what the message has been so far. Doing the same thing over and over again is stupid. That's my final thoughts.
Thanks, Duke. Makes a lot of sense. Faisal, final thoughts?
Well, I think we talked a lot about Abiy's challenges, but I see also the challenges for TDF, TPLF. They cannot go back because there's a lot of resources, mega resources and life involved on their side. I think, at minimum, they should keep some of the areas that they have captured in order to create an stalemate until a serious negotiation starts with the Ethiopian government. I think what we have is a very unique situation in which the Syrian government is destroying its own country, and the more and the longer the war continues, the more the condition is that Skayal mentioned will be materialized, including infight among the high-ranking military men. As Duke said, different soldiers abandoning their equipment and becoming a source of weapons, not a source of defense for Ethiopian side, but a source of weaponry for TDF. Because at this point in time, I think one thing that, and I started my discussion today to say that, what is there that Abiy is looking from this? There is impossibility, in my opinion, knowing the history of Ethiopia all the way in the 70s, that he can defeat any of the rebel groups, whether it's Ola or TDF, TPLF, or even if the Ogaden National Liberation Front picks up the arms again in the east and starts another fire. Abiy needs to realize that his options to win the war, as he himself admitted, is limited. If that's the case, I think it's about time that he brings something to the table that's very serious. And I think on the TDF, TPLF side, it's about time that they shouldn't go back from Kopa. I don't know if they would continue down, but going back a second time will drain the energy of the people of Tigray. So maybe a stalemate can make the talks meaningful. When people around Abiy see that TDF is holding areas that belong to the federal government for a longer period of time, then he may be even undermined by his own people, and he may lose legitimacy more and more.
Thank you, Faisal. Final thoughts for the day, Gail?
The strength of the Tigrayan Defense Forces and the Tigrayan government. I don't want to use this word that they're fighting for survival because it's a cliche. I would rather say that they are willing to die. They're willing to die. And that's the inspiration. That's their source, the source of their strength. And it's showing in the battlefield. On the Ethiopian side, on the ENDF side, three things that Abiy is banking on. First, he is banking on this inexhaustible supply of human beings that he could throw at the TPLF fire. That Ethiopia has 120 million people, so he could simply draw on that forever. I'm not making this up. He had said it. He'd said it once in Parliament that because they have so many unemployed youth in Ethiopia that that they could wreak havoc in the streets of Cairo with suicide bombers. Abiy Ahmed said that. He did say that. And he's still Prime Minister of Ethiopia after saying that. Second, he talks all the time about how he had modernized the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. He'd always bragged that the TPLF doesn't know how he had reformed the military, the Air Force. Always says that. He said it, I guess, in some of the things that you played even today, that he was saying that the reform that he guided, the reform that he unleashed in Ethiopia, especially the security sector reform, had made the Ethiopian army a formidable fighting force. We don't see that, and we don't see that his Air Force had broken the will of the Tigrayan people and the Oromo people to surrender and kneel down to his will. We haven't seen that. There is no evidence of that. We haven't seen it. Third, he banks on brutality. Abiy, in one of his interviews once, he had the temerity to say he's not going to repeat the mistake of the Derg. What he meant by that is that the Derg was fighting with the TPLF or the TPLF army at the time, but when he was fighting, he left the fighting theater porous, that the TPLF forces could cross to the Sudan, get their supplies from there. He said he will not do that. He was not going to allow that. So his brutality, his callousness would be the other thing that he's going to bank on to win this war. So this is the Ethiopian side, and that the willingness to die is on the Tigrayan side. So we're seeing what's going to happen. I don't see that the TDF is going to back out. In fact, I probably predict that this week Humara might fall to the TDF side because there are no forces in Humara. They have all fled. On the OLF side, in the western part of Ethiopia, they don't intend to hold towns. They hold only the rural areas because they don't want to take any responsibility for administering towns. And I think that's what's happening in Tigray as well. They're not going to hold Sakota. They're not going to come and hold Waldia and hold it. They're not going to do that. They're not going to waste their energy and their personnel guarding cities. That's not going to happen. They're not going to do that. The tactic is different. So it's up to the international community to do what they did. And I don't want to be a preacher or a broken disc in this one. to do what they did in Yugoslavia, the Dayton-type peace process, to force these combatants to come to the negotiating table. Absent that, this war is going to be decided and decided decisively in the battlefield.
Thank you, Uzgal. I think that is a good closing to our today's show. But as the days unfold in terms of what's happening both in Addis Ababa and in the battlefront, was it Faisal who was mentioning about the number of fronts that are opened on Tigray? And these were exactly the, I guess, 15 fronts that are everywhere, from southern to eastern, northern, western, everywhere, with Ethiopian, Amhara militias, Eritrean and Ethiopian forces. And what's happening in Djibouti may be something that the recent article by Michael Rubin mentions it's a tactic to prolong and starving Tigray to submission. We'll be following that with our upcoming episodes on the H panel. But today, good night from here. Thank you so much for your insight, Duke, Faisal, and Scale. Have a great weekend.
Thank
That
you.
was the H panel today, and thank you for following us both online and on satellite in the Horn of Africa. Your host was Getachew Asafa. We discuss on Ethiopia, talk peace, do war. Bye from here. Good night.